Ladies and gentlemen, please now welcome Steve Smith, Executive Vice President, Technology and Venture Banking Group at Wells Fargo.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve from Wells Fargo, and I just want to welcome you here today to this informative session. Mitchell Baker is the Executive Chairwoman and co-founder of Mozilla, the maker of the Firefox browser. Mozilla has been a pioneer and advocate for the web for more than 15 years. Mozilla is a nonprofit with a mission to ensure that the internet is a global public resource, open and accessible to all. It has a vibrant global community of developers and contributors. Mitchell has been the general manager of Mozilla project since 1999. She is responsible for organizing and motivating a massive worldwide collective of employees and volunteers committed to an open, innovative web and the infinite possibilities it presents. Please help me give me a warm introduction and welcome to Mitchell Baker.
Notice the introduction was about Mozilla, and just to be clear, we're best known for Firefox. And so many of you may have used or used Firefox. That is our instantiation of the goals that Steve mentioned. Our purpose is to make sure that the internet is good for all of life. Clearly, the economic engine and private enterprise drives great value and is part of the magic sauce of what makes commerce and life in the United States so great. In addition, the internet is the infrastructure for all of our lives, civic and social value, our meetings with our teachers about our kids, a whole range of activities that aren't predicated on economic activity. And so by building Firefox and our other products, Mozilla tries to build a piece of the internet that is robust and rich and exciting for all aspects of life, and that is a platform for a level playing field for businesses, so that the internet remains a competitive space where the core APIs and the core mechanisms are interoperable, and where competition is possible by new entrants in as many layers as possible. But what I'm here today is not so much to talk about Mozilla, but to talk a little bit about the trends that I see in technology and society from the vantage point of Mozilla and our Firefox work. So the topic bigger, bolder is completely relevant, of course, to the technology area. And bigger and bolder sounds great when we think about I will be bigger or bolder, or my organization will be bigger or bolder. And it's much more challenging when someone else is bigger and bolder, and comes into our space. And then we have disruption. And disruption is glamorous, and it's sometimes fun to watch. It can be exciting if you're in the middle of it, and pretty devastating if you're on the other end of it and not really prepared for us. And we have seen some industries deeply disrupted to date, and I predict we will see others. The digitization of everything is picking up speed, as is the datafication of everything. And so over the next few years, we will see more and more industries become more reliant on information technology and data transmission. Sometimes real time, like sensors are cheap. In some parts of the world, the network is available, latency is low. So real-time data processing will become part of more and more industries. So all industries have been through the first phases of the digital revolution, with websites and mobile devices and interaction with customers and information flows that are different. But the next phase will be equally transformative, either exciting or interesting. Combined with this, there are some social trends that occur, one of which is, of course, wow. The changes in life through technology are amazing, and that sense of change will continue. We also have increasing awareness of the unequal distribution of technology. And there's information now, the new McKinsey report, for example, is beginning to document that the degree to which a person or a business digitizes early is the degree to which your advantage increases. That was a complex sentence. Let me re-say it. If you digitize early, your advantage over those who don't increases. So the difference between, we'll say, the digital haves or have-nots, or the businesses that are deeper in digitizing all of their activities, it's growing disproportionately. And so the difference, modulo some social action, is increasing. So that's obviously an opportunity for businesses that are able to make the change and digitize, and a area where some thought on a social level is really required. Increasing the pace of inequality in a long-term system is not likely to lead to stability, particularly on a global level. And so the challenges of digitization require thinking and acting as well on what are the social impacts of those. That's a tricky setting. From the Valley, we see, for example, in Europe, the default reaction is to regulate. That's one answer to it. Difficult to innovate, tends to promote the status quo in that case, which I think is not what we need. And so the answer of sort of market response, very important, probably not a complete solution, particularly as inequality continues to grow. So some very interesting trends, very exciting in possibility, and some pretty significant challenges as to how those are distributed or not. And of course, all of these result in change. And change, for many people, is actually deeply uncomfortable. My boss at Netscape, for any of you who use Netscape Navigator to find the web at first, Jim Barksdale, who ran Netscape, used to say, people love progress. It's change they can't stand. And I have found in my experience that is true of most people. But change is coming. And so to make the best of it, it requires some business preparation and I think some personal preparation in learning to love change, as most people don't. And so California, and in particular the Bay Area, I think is uniquely poised to lead here. I should say I was born in Berkeley and grew up in Oakland, so I'm probably biased towards the Bay Area. But nevertheless, I think we have an almost unique ability to continue to lead. We are an area with a constant influx of new and different people and new and different perspectives, and that will absolutely be required. So I think as a community, we're well positioned. As individuals, it can take a little work because many people really are not comfortable with change. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do at Mozilla is to identify how to get more comfortable and how to engage in change more. Because that saying that if you don't disrupt yourself, someone else will, is all too true. And it turns out, at least for me, I found that it's good to experiment before disruption comes your way. So for example, most successful people have a large degree of control over our lives. And the experience of having someone with a different perspective, something that's really crazy and seems different, is easy to filter out. But in an organization and a society that is going to undergo the kinds of changes that digitization brings, we have to learn how to respond positively to change and how to let different perspectives in. This is one reason that I'm so intent on diversity and inclusion. Part of it is a social equity issue, which I think stands alone. But a second reason is that new ideas and the ability to see things differently is fundamental to coping with change. And we are trying things like bringing this into a personal life. So really, what was the last time someone from a wildly different perspective caused you to do something that you were really uncomfortable about or that you really didn't like? With our kids, we teach them and we help them and support them to try new things that they're scared about or they don't want to do or we think is important. Because as kids, a big part of control is given over to your parents. But as successful professionals, how often do we actually listen, invite someone in with a wildly different perspective, think it's really totally crazy, maybe scary, probably stupid, but go ahead and invest time and energy into it anyway and see what happens? Pretty odd, and the first time it may really have been not a very good idea. But in that case, I encourage you to try again, because when disruption comes to your business, the response and the patterned response of listening to crazy ideas and figuring out something to respond and changing your reality and the reality of your business in response will be key. And in that setting, if the first thing doesn't work, like, you have to try again. Certainly at Mozilla, we've had this experience. You know, our goal is to bring openness and innovation and an equal playing field into online life. And so one of the things we tried was another phone and operating system called Firefox OS. And after some years of pretty serious effort, we concluded that wasn't going to be successful. Right? The mobile phone operating system is Apple and Android, you know, for the foreseeable future, until something even more disruptive comes along. But that doesn't mean we're done. We have to lick our wounds and then go back and say, well, how do we accomplish our mission anyway? Because, you know, in your private life, it's easy to go back to what's comfortable and convenient, but of course in your business life, the disruption and the digitization and the pace of change, it's not going away. And so I find sometimes that if I'm able to name the fear, like I really don't want to change, I'm pretty comfortable. But if I name it and say, well, that's life, you know, life has dealt me the hand where it's time to deal with change, it's much easier to actually really adopt it and to find a way to see it as exciting. Like, change can sometimes be liberating, and it's finding like that promise that gives the ongoing ability to continue to drive an organization, to lead an organization into change, and to help all the people around us adapt with changing circumstances. And I think with that, I'll stop, and Steve and I will have a conversation. Thank you. There we go.
So we have some planned questions to ask, but you know, we just got to know each other before, about 10 minutes beforehand. We were talking about fintech, we were talking about the Bay Area economy, we were talking about lots of things. But let's just start with the diversity and inclusion that you talked about. And one of the things we talked about before we came on stage is just the Bay Area and why the Bay Area seems to be leading the country in diversity and inclusion. Why do you think that is happening in the Bay Area? And how, obviously that's very important for Mozilla because you're a worldwide company.
Right. I'd say, first of all, I'd say we're a worldwide organization. Because we are a nonprofit, we have a huge amount of volunteer communities around the world. And so we are diverse both in the global volunteer community, but also because people who are volunteers will really speak their mind. It's part of what I think is really important. You know, when you have employees, there are a lot of reasons which cause employees not to raise topics that are important. Like, in theory, if your employees are really engaged and they're competent and they're aware and interested in success, they have a range of knowledge from being in the trenches or on the ground or whatever metaphor one uses. But very often, you know, that knowledge doesn't make its way throughout the organization. And there's a lot of reasons why an employee won't speak up. You know, his or her boss he doesn't like, or she doesn't like, or the boss doesn't like them, or you think it's incompetent, or it's just too hard. There's a lot of reasons. But for employees, for volunteers, it's really quite different, because by the time somebody's spending 5 or 10 or 12 hours a week working on something as a volunteer, they're pouring their life energy into something because it really matters, and their ability to actually speak up and say, you know, this isn't working, or that program you designed, it feels so much like California. Like, it has no relevance to us here. Why would I do that? I'm not doing it. Like, I know you think you want to do it, but we're just not going to. Like, why would I spend my time doing that? And so that's a very kind of diversity that often we don't think about. But let me get to the traditional one first. Like, California is still pretty young. In the United States, it's still an immigration positive state. And by that, I don't mean citizenship, I mean from all over the United States. Like, people come to California. It has a history of new ideas and new things. So I think we're better prepared. Like, I don't want to say everything's great. Like, we have enormous inequality and differences in socioeconomic classes and ties to ethnicity that are really huge. So I don't want to pat us on the back too much and act like everything is fine. But I think as a general state of mind, the new and the change is still bred into the social structure here.
Do you see a correlation between diversity of the Bay Area and the entrepreneurial spirit that you see in the Bay Area? Obviously, there's a correlation of talented individuals that have come to the United States and built companies, and so many of them have come to the Bay Area. But in your experience, have you seen that?
Well, yes and no. You know, there is some research that shows that a group that knows each other very, very well declines in its innovative potential, because as you get to know each other well, your ideas get more similar. You're not as critical. You're more careful of somebody else's feeling. So I'm not actually sure about that diversity and entrepreneurship are so closely tied. And I do think certainly in the Valley, entrepreneurship is pretty much young white men. So it's hard to really claim that's a high point of diversity. So I think the two are interesting and related topics, but not necessarily tied in that degree.
You've been at Mozilla now and Netscape since 93?
93, 94, yeah.
93, 94,
Yeah.
which is
Ancient.
which is amazing for the Bay Area. Tell us about some of the reasons of why you've stayed at Mozilla and just how, obviously, you've done a fantastic job and you've been very influential in helping build the business, but just walk us through kind of your mindset in staying at Mozilla and helping build that company versus, I'm sure, lots of other opportunities you've had to work at either at startups or at venture firms.
Sure. Well, you know, I remember computers before the World Wide Web. And so two companies, Apple and Microsoft, two separate stacks. Your choice of hardware determined the apps, determined everything. It actually determined the data. It just determined everything. And in that era, of course, Apple lost. Microsoft had 97% of the market. 97% of the operating system, 97% of the apps, 97% of the servers, 97% of the data formats and information behind it. Like a degree of hegemony that we haven't seen since. So I remember that, and then the web appeared and cracked all of that open. First of all, it cracked open opportunity. You know, in those days, Microsoft would come to the Valley and would talk to venture capitalists, and it would be very clear if you invested in this kind of company, Microsoft would be happy to buy it and you could make money, and if you invested in this kind of company, that was a threat to Microsoft and you were going to be at war and the chance of making money was low. So it didn't have that wild, innovative potential, and it didn't have the ability to do something really new and different without asking permission. So then the web came along and it cracked everything open. So a few things. One, you could get to amazing places. You know, I was an exchange student in China, before the economic miracle, and suddenly I could get back to Peking University, like totally unheard of in those days. So the nature of the network is just a huge draw. Like we used to say the web for that phrase, but I love the web. Like the things we can do, the instantaneous access to so much. Like it's hard to let go of that.
So I know our CEO from Wells came and spoke earlier about fintech, and obviously if you watch 60 Minutes, you read the paper, everybody's talking about fintech, disruption in fintech, and I know you were talking about disruption. What's next? Do you think there's this disruption, obviously is going to continue in the Bay Area with legacy businesses that are going to have technology applied to them and change those businesses forever? What are you seeing in the economy right now that you've been thinking about in terms of disruption? I know you were mentioning it in your speech earlier.
Yeah, well there's a couple different things. One, I'm going to start globally and work back. China is a market that is large enough and distinct enough to support its own ecosystem. Like many markets aren't really large enough to get to the scale, but China is one. We see that through Alibaba, for example. And it's a distinct enough market that just taking the products that develop in China and bringing them here is hard. Just like taking U.S. products and taking into China without changes is hard. So it's not, there's a barrier in between the products that are global in scale, maybe the largest in their category in the world. There is a barrier towards them being appropriate and in other parts of the world. But I think that barrier will decline over time. So I do think there is disruption in at least one other technology center with the market size and clout that we're used to thinking is only in Silicon Valley. So I think that's one. I don't know when that happens, but I think that probably does happen. I think the impact and power of data, it is actually hard to imagine how much that can change until you actually see it at work. And so I think there's probably at least, research indicates some disruption in white-collar fields. I'll give an example. I am a licensed attorney. I haven't practiced in many years, but one of the early jobs of a new attorney is due diligence for an acquisition, and you will read hundreds to thousands of pages of paper, and you can't make a mistake. What is the merger or acquisition clause in every agreement that's been done? Well, that is easier to do by machine now.
Yeah.
Easier, faster, potentially more accurate. So there are a range of jobs where disruption is coming that are not manufacturing jobs. So the key, one key aspect is, where is the creation of new jobs? How do those get matched to the disruption? So ton of disruption coming there. But on the positive side, the kinds of things that we can know and do with data, the kinds of changes that we can make are really quite phenomenal. You can understand, is a city working, is a city not working? You can understand, is my posture good? My bad back, what's happening to it now? I really need to sit down or do whatever it is now. There's just such a range of things. So I think it's both incredibly exciting and disruption, and there are some real social challenges.
We've got about 5 minutes left. I have a real, I'm not on script, we're just chatting, but I have a real
I said before, ask whatever you want.
Yeah,
Here we go.
well, I have a real curious question, then maybe if somebody else has a question in the audience, we'll open up for one question, but how do you recruit in the Valley when you're, as a nonprofit, when you're really limited in the kind of equity awards that you can give either engineers, programmers, employees, et cetera? How do you recruit? Obviously, you've built a culture at Mozilla, right, in this innovative age that you figured out how to do that, and you're up against competitors like Google and others that obviously have equity awards. So how have you done that?
We have a few different tools. First, I would say it's probably our goals. As a nonprofit, it's called a mission, but we are actually trying to build the fundamental structure, i.e. the network, of more and more of our life in a way that puts individual human beings at the center and is not about, does this set of shareholders generate disproportionate returns?
Okay.
It is, so that is actually
So they have to kind
a
of
big draw.
They need to buy off on that when they come in and interview.
Yes.
Okay.
Especially, and the higher you go up the leadership chain, the more that you need that. That's one. Two, we don't have equity awards. We are very competitive in salaries and bonuses. Right. So that's important. And increasingly, some people do very well in the equity lottery, but there are also a lot of people who went to startups that failed miserably. So you do get a sense that not everybody wins.
Don't hear about those very often.
No, but it's still the majority of them.
Yeah.
And the third piece is that we work very hard so that each person can have impact. Because sometimes some large companies are really great at saying, wow, you're one of 10 or 20 or 50 or 270,000, and even so you have a scope and role and impact, but many are not. And so the third choice is your personal impact on a product that has a global scale and scope.
How is, obviously you have a law degree from Bolt and then you transitioned into a CEO. How is, it's not common, but I know there's been some very successful CEOs that have gone that transition from law to CEO. How's that worked, and how's that, I mean, obviously you've been, the law training I think is just exceptional for the kind of work you're doing. Do you use it very often?
Not directly.
Not directly.
So I'll come back to that. Certainly the goal for a founding team is not one person. I think different VC firms vary in whether the ideal is 2 or 3, but it's not one. Like maybe 30 years ago it was 1, I don't know, but it's certainly not now. So I had a partner, the technical, not a product guy, but a technology platform infrastructure person, and that was a very, very close partnership. So that's important. 2, my, I think, particular expertise is structuring organizational dynamics. Okay. Like, how is it that you can have a nonprofit that competes in the market that has employees and global volunteers around the world, and it works in some different way? And how do you actually get people moving in the same direction? And I think the third piece is I am not a micromanager. right? Like some CEOs or leaders are really good at delegating, and some are really good at just knowing when it's time to dive deep and micromanage a certain piece. And because of the breadth of what we're trying to do, it is the nature of the network itself that we're trying to influence. For Mozilla, real success is when there are many, many people in the world who aren't employees, who feel identified with the mission and that they can do something. You can talk about it, you can encourage people to use a product, you can say, you can identify with Mozilla without being an employee, and that requires kind of a breadth and a different organizational skill, which seems I have.
Well, we're out of time, but please join me in congratulating and thanking Mitchell Baker for joining us today. It's been a great discussion.